Edible Plants, Part 7. Panicum is the genus that includes switchgrass and millet. Archaeologists have found evidence that millet has been grown since about 10,000 years ago. Up until the production of rice and wheat, it was the most important food for early humans. It is still widely grown as a food crop in many places. The seeds of all the switchgrass are edible. It's the main tall grass in tall grass prairies in the eastern United States, but it's very widespread throughout the world. The crop millet was probably chosen because it's very resistant to droughts. It's also very nutritious and it has a good taste. Palo verde is a legume. It's a small tree that lives in the desert, has a green bark. The young pods of Palo verde can be cooked as a vegetable, or the seeds can be ground into meal. The plants are very resistant to drought. They have become an invasive species in places like Australia. One person with a recipe suggests to pick the peas before the husks have dried. Yampa are members of the parsley family. They were a very important food source for many Native American tribes. It is apparently best picked when the plant is dormant. The roots can be dried for later use. It can also be ground into a powder and mixed with other flour. Some people really rave about the taste. It is said to have a texture and flavor somewhat similar to water chestnuts. You do need to be careful because the plant does resemble hemlock. Young foliage of coldfoot is edible. You should boil the plant first in water to remove some of the toxins though. Flowers are sometimes used as a flavoring agent. Stems are sometimes peeled like rhubarb. The young foliage can be used as a pot herb. It should be rinsed though because it does contain toxins. That should also make it taste better if you change the water. Canary grass is widely used as a grain for feeding birds. It is grown as a food crop in the Canary Islands, Italy, and North Africa. It's also eaten in some places in Mexico. The young shoots of reedgrass can be eaten raw. The roots probably should be cooked. The roots are very sweet. They contain up to 5% sugar. That is in addition to a lot of starch. You can also boil the roots and get sugar that way. The seeds can be ground into flour. The young plants are probably better eaten before the leaves come out. A sugary sap sometimes comes out of the stem and you can make that into candy. All pine seeds are edible. Not all of them are large enough to be worthwhile. Not all coniferous plants are edible though. Most of the ones I pictured here are pinyon pines, but any type of pine tree will yield other things that are edible. The inner bark can be used as an emergency food supply. Some pines have very sweet sap. Pine seeds are covered by a hard coating. It needs to be cracked open to remove the seed. Plantain is a very common weed found in many lawns. It makes a very good green for pot herbs. The seeds and roots are also edible. The coating on the seeds has a mucilaginous covering. It's used to make Metamucil. It's very high in soluble fiber. Older leaves tend to get very tough. They have strong fibers in them that can be used to make twine. Knotweed or smartweed is a very widespread and diverse group of plants. It's hard to show what they actually look like. They have a common feature. They have a little sleeve-like thing, the reason they call them knotweeds. I included an illustration that shows it pretty well what they look like. They don't all look quite that dramatic though. They vary greatly in edibility. Some of them are quite bitter. Some of them are very good though. Pretty much the entire plant is edible. Some of these are aquatic also. Japanese knotweed is very invasive, but it's good eating when you can find it. The catkins or reproductive structures on both cottonwoods and aspens are edible. The inner bark is also edible. It's generally scraped off and made into a powder after being dried. Cottonwoods are often very large trees. When they start setting their seed, you'll see the cotton in the air for miles. Purslane is one of my favorite wild foods. I actually intentionally grow it on my patio. It's very good as a pot herb. It can be eaten raw. It's one of the few plant sources that are very high in omega-3 fats. Gandhi was reported to have said it was his favorite food. There's a small amount of oxalic acid, so you probably shouldn't eat too much of it. You also need to be a little bit careful. There's a type of spurge that looks very much like it. Pondweed is a very diverse and common plant. It's obviously found in ponds. The leaves are said to be edible by some, but you need to cook it first. The roots are the main part that's edible. It's a very starchy root. It's a good survival food. Those plants are found throughout the entire world, so it's good to know what they are just in case you need it one day. Potentilla, or silverweed, was a staple food amongst many native tribes. The root is the main edible part, but you can also eat the leaves. It's actually a member of the rose family. They often form dense tangles. They can sometimes be found in high tidal marshes. It can also be found in mountain meadows. The plants are covered with fine silvery hairs. That's where it gets its name. The seed pods of devil's claw can be eaten. They are usually boiled. The roots and seeds are also edible. The pods are best when they're about half ripe. The greens can be used as a pot herb. The plant is also said to be bitter and foul smelling. It has very unusual seeds that grab a hold of the legs of animals. Mesquite are legumes with edible pods. The seeds are also edible. The inner part of the pod can be very sweet in some of them. It ranges from bitter to sweet. Not all of the pod is edible. There's a pulpy or pithy layer inside the outer covering that can be scraped out. You might need a rock to crack the seed pods. They're very hard. The taste apparently varies considerably from tree to tree. Selfheal has edible leaves. They can also be used for making tea. The leaves can be eaten either raw or cooked. They taste somewhat bitter because they have tannin in them. Probably wise to leach them at least once or boil them with a change of water. It has a long history of medicinal use. Its other name is heal-all. It has a wide range of Hollyleaf cherry is a wild cherry found in Southern California. It's sometimes grown as an ornamental. It's reported to have a very pleasant taste. Some people really like it. It only has a very thin flesh, though. The seed can also be eaten, but it has hydrogen cyanide in it, so it needs to be leached. Hydrogen cyanide is very bitter, so you leach it until the bitterness is gone. The leaves really do look quite a lot like holly. Sierra plums are a small edible plum of the Pacific Northwest. It's usually found at low elevation near the coast. It can sometimes be found in the lower foothills, though. It often forms a thicket of shrubs, but it can sometimes be a large tree. I used to gather gallons of chokecherries when I was a little kid. They taste very astringent when they're raw, but they're quite good when they're cooked. We used to make a lot of jelly out of them, and also cherry pies. A lot of that was probably just gathering them yourself, but they seem like they're some of the best cherry pies I ever ate. You need to be careful because the pits have cyanide, and also the wilted leaves are very high in cyanide. Acorns are probably the staple food for the Native Americans that live here in Southern California. Out in the desert you can find pits in the rocks where they grind the acorns. You can't eat them raw because they have tannins in them and it'll make you sick. It's also very bitter. What they would do is they would grind them up and then they would soak them in water for several days. That would make them very edible and taste much better. That's it for part 7.